Once upon a time there lived a famous blacksmith. The young man swung his hammer over his sword. He had a shop where he sold his products. These were swords, helmets, shields, and so on, and also a lot of money and jewelry. One day he was lucky enough to cooperate with the kingdom of Cairo. The flag fluttered in the wind. At that time there was a war, and for him it was an incredible chance to increase his status. People in armor fought. He knelt down. After the end of the war he was awarded the title of Baron. And this blacksmith is the owner of this land, the father of Mr. Roman. The young man listened attentively to the old man's story. The man sat opposite him and said that something like this. The smart man looked at them and thought, why is he even listening to a story that everyone already knows? A few hours ago they met. The guy looked at him and asked if he really wants to say that he is the eldest son of the Dmitri family. Then he imagined the city, and this is the kingdom of Cairo, located on the continent of Lamandra, and the world called Nuria does not exist. The man looked at him and answered embarrassedly that yes, he thought it was strange what came over him, although he is too smart, but he sees it like this for the first time. Then he turned around. In the background were guys sitting and talking. The man thought that he was really on drugs. He heard that it is popular now with rich kids. Yes, he thinks so. The guy came up and addressed him. He raised his hand and said that today his fiancée is coming to him, the lady and the Lawrence family. He thought that this was more than possible, since Mr. Roman, unlike his brothers, sat in his room for the last 25 years. Therefore, he was nicknamed a fool and with the Dmitri family. The young man looked down. The servant told him that the lady appreciates elegance and manners, so he needs to. But the boy interrupted him and said that there is something more important than that. He turned around and added that he needs to be taken to the elder of this land. For him this lady is less important than the ability to live in this world. The man looked at him and thought, why, a person who has lived here all his life says so, but what can he do? Being a simple servant, he just needs to fulfill all his whims. After which he said that he understood everything. Present tense, the man raised his hand and said that this is all he knows. The guy folded his hands, thanked him for his help, said that he would reward him for this. After which the old man scratched the back of his head and said that it was an honor for him to even talk to him. The brunette lowered his head, thinking that he is Roman Dmitri, but his real name is Baek Jung-hak. He imagined the magician as a true follower of the martial arts of Murim. He lived a stormy life and, having achieved everything he aspired to, peacefully accepted his death, but for some reason he woke up in the body of Roman Dmitri. He looked down and wondered if this was the will of heaven, or if this was God's punishment for not accepting the ascension. He turned around. The elder did not understand what was happening. In the street, he could hear people shouting that he was a degenerate. They kicked the boy in the head, shouting for him to die. Everyone around looked at this with horror. The young man was lying on the ground near the vegetable counter. He was bleeding, barely breathing. The man looked at him and smirked and said that he was a vile spawn. After that, he hit him on the head again. 2 people held his hands and beat him. The servant went there, asked him to go through, but then he was very surprised. He saw a tattoo on his hand. It was a tattoo. Then he raised his head and thought about what was happening. Next to him stood a brunette. The servant raised his head and said that it seemed to be Bloody Fangs. The young man looked at him and asked again who it was. Then the man opened his eyes and imagined a gang of scoundrels. This is a usurious group that operates not only on the clan's land, but also in the surrounding territories. It seems that this boy is in great debt to the Bloody Fangs since they have gone so far. Then he whispered to him that they should just pretend that they do not see anything, but the guy had already left. He approached them and told them to stop. The man turned around and did not understand what was happening. The servant ran after the master. Interfering was clearly a bad idea. He stood and looked at them. One of the gang members realized that it was Roman. He exhaled and began to shout that he thinks that he can do anything because he is a nobleman. What an idiot. The young man continued to silently look at him. The men started laughing and said that he better get out of here and not disgrace himself. He should leave them alone before they get to him. The servant intervened, said that they should leave. The Bloody Fangs are dangerous people, but the boy stopped him. He turned and said that he still did not fully understand the laws of this world, so he had to explain something to him. He lowered his eyes and asked who broke the law and what punishment should they receive. Hans was shocked. He looked at the youth and the men. Since the boy could not return the debt on time, he was to blame. But the Bloody Fangs did not have the right to decide this issue themselves, And more importantly, they showed disrespect to him, the eldest son of the Dmitri clan. Then he lowered his head and said that this was a crime that would cost them their lives. According to the law of this land, it would not be strange if they received the death penalty. The man looked at him furiously. The man felt uneasy about this. Then the guy stepped forward and asked if they heard. They broke the law of this land. He took a stick and said that's why. Raised it up. He, the eldest son of Lord Romero Dmitri, will carry out justice. One of the gang members looked at him and said that he understands that he is a noble man who does not know how the world works, but he took out his knife. He puts them in a very difficult position. In his opinion, he does not even know what situation he got into now. The guy smiled and said that this confirms everything. The man did not understand what he was talking about, and the young man stepped forward, said that they were a bunch of scum since they were talking like that to the lord of this land. He ran forward and started shouting that he did not give a damn what they were doing there. The gang was shocked. They shouted that they must attack him. The man clenched his teeth, preparing to attack. He stretched his hand forward but missed. This surprised him very much. Blood flowed. A blow was struck. The guy stabbed one of them in the throat with a stick. He groaned, and blood began to drip from the stick. After he pulled it out, he went to the others. They were scared. Then they began to attack and insult him again. Hans was screaming in fear at this time. The second member of the gang swung. He struck, but the young man turned his head to the side and he missed. Then he kicked, and again he struck with the stick. Blood flowed in all directions. Hans was simply horrified. He thought, was this man really Mr. Roman? And the guy at that moment eliminated another member of the team. He looked ahead and thought that the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was a will written by Roman and several tablets on the floor. He remembered this very will. The kingdom of Cairo, which often fought, chose representatives from each family and forced them to serve the kingdom. He picked up this will. Roman, who was chosen to go to the army and represent his family, committed suicide out of fear. It was a miserable life, but no matter what life he lived. He swung his arm and thought that the current owner of this body was the leader of the heavenly demon sect, Junghak. He imagined himself in his past life. Since he occupied this body, he would live like Junghak. He moved his hand to the side. All his opponents were dead. Suddenly, something distracted him. He turned around and thought there were monsters there. A man was running away from him. He was screaming. The guy grabbed him by the hair. He bent him forward. The man screamed for him to let go. Then he put him on his knees and said that in order for the group to act in the existing manner, it was necessary to enforce the law. He raised the knife and said that he would not take his life, but he would still have to pay. He bent his head. The man screamed. His eyes suddenly widened and he screamed. After that, his cut tongue fell to the ground. He held his mouth. All the people around were shocked. The guy said that his name was Roman Dmitri. He stood in front of them and added that if any of them did not like the punishment he gave them, they could speak up at any time. His eyes were burning. With his stunning strength, the man climbed to the top of Murim. There was a mountain of corpses around. Hundreds and thousands of masters challenged him, but were eventually killed. Blood was everywhere. When it formed a river, the whole world recognized that the heavenly demon sector controls all of Murim. The guy looked at his bloody hands. I thought that now it took him so long to deal with some gang of bandits. Their lifeless bodies lay on the floor. Then he turned around and turned to Hans. The man answered him, and the guy said that he should call the guards, report what happened, and tell them to take care of this matter. He put his hand to his chest and agreed with a shaking voice, after which he hurried to run away from there. The young man continued to look at his hands and thought that this body was useless. It had almost no life energy and the flow was simply terrible. He clenched his fist and thought that he needed to gather information as soon as possible and strengthen this body. The boy who was being beaten came up to him and thanked him for helping him. The brunette turned around and thought it was the boy who was being beaten by those bandits. He turned around and said that the boy had misunderstood everything. He did it to help him. He looked down and added that the Bloody Fangs had broken the law, so he had to punish them, and he was no exception, so he would have to tell everything, even if he didn't try to lie, otherwise he would end up like them, if of course he wanted to keep his tongue. The boy lowered his head and thought. Then he started talking. He came closer and sheepishly said that his parents had borrowed money from the Bloody Fang to buy land for farming. They could easily pay them off if they sold the harvest. The boy started screaming that those bastards had destroyed their entire harvest. He remembered coming to the field. Corn cobs and broken bushes were lying on the ground, so they couldn't pay them off. Then he clenched his fist and said that later he found out that these freaks did it because they wanted his little sister. The boy fell to the ground and started screaming with tears that it was unfair, they had never hurt anyone. He looked at the Lord and started asking him to at least save his little sister. But the main character at that moment was looking at his eyes. They were filled with horror. It felt like looking at a crazy demon who was one of the 4 heavenly kings. The brunette raised his head and thought that he also met one crazy demon in the same backwater place, and also asked the boy his name. The guy lowered his head and said that he was Kevin. Roman turned around and said that okay, he would check what he said a little later and take care of what happened today. The boy started screaming that he was very grateful, and the guy closed his eyes, thought that it was just a feeling, but something told him that this was not their last meeting. The chariot was driving through the city. Conversations could be heard from there. They would soon arrive at the land of the Dmitri family. Inside sat a girl. She closed her eyes and agreed. She lowered her eyes and said that she would soon meet Roman Dmitri. A month before, she was furious. She screamed so loudly that it could be heard even in the street. A marriage of convenience with the Dmitri family did not suit her. The father looked out the window and replied that she understood that their lands were in a precarious position, they had no other choice. The blonde raised her hand and thought that it could not be, she would have to marry, and even one of the Dmitris, she would spend the rest of her life in this family. She imagined men with equipment, thought that almost all of this family were minors. The girl put her hand to her chest and said that this was too much, but the father did not want to listen to her. He understood the head and said that he was really very sorry that he felt sorry for her. The father had to make such a decision. She looked to the side. They said they had arrived. The servant helped her out of the carriage. She was supposed to marry her son's second son, who had a bright future ahead of him. They walked down the corridor and she understood that even this was not destined to happen. The young man turned around. Flora continued to think that her eldest son Roman Dmitri had forced her to marry him. She closed her eyes. Roman was an idiot who lived for his own pleasure. Why would he get so carried away? Even though the girl understood the deplorable state of their land, but she simply could not do this. Flora turned around and started to leave. Then she raised her head and thought that she should definitely tell the Lord about this. She turned around and suggested that they forget about the marriage, and he smiled in response and said that it was wonderful. The girl was very surprised. Roman put his hand to his chest, said that he had heard about this marriage and did not understand how such an idiot dared to marry someone like her, so he would also like to celebrate this wedding. Flora looked at the Lord and wondered if he was serious. It was somehow strange. Roman turned around and was going to go tell his father about it, and the girl asked him to wait a little. He turned around and asked what was wrong. The blonde replied that she heard that he expressed a desire to marry her, and added that now he wants to call off the marriage without a good reason, so she was a little taken aback. The young man looked and did not understand whether Flora wanted to marry him in the end or not, to which she replied that she did not really. The brunette went further and said that this was great. They both agreed to call off the marriage, so this could be the end of their conversation, and yes, he would take full responsibility. She had nothing to worry about. Then he raised his hand and said that he was already called the idiot of the family, so it was not such a big problem if he added a divorcee to it. The blonde looked at him in shock, wondering what was wrong with him. She watched him leave. Did they really call him an idiot? Shouts were heard from the garden office. He asked what his son was talking about. Cancel the marriage? Was he out of his mind? Well, the guy stood in front of him and calmly answered that yes, he had already agreed on everything with the lady. The father was incredibly angry. He shouted that he was an idiot, despite the fact that people called him the idiot of the family. He, as a father, tried to prove the opposite. The man looked at him and shouted that marriage with the Lawrence family is the best way for them, the Dmitri family, to take a good position as nobles. He also added that all he had to do was marry this noble girl, but he can't even do that. The young man exhaled and apologized. The father took a glass, swung it, and asked, does he really think that an apology can fix anything? And threw it right at his son's head. Then he pointed his finger at the guy and said that if everything went smoothly, he would be able to do something with his summons, but now in 6 months he will have to go to the battlefield. Is there anything to say? Roman lowered his head and said no. The man added that he also heard that he had some problems with the Bloody Fang. Witnesses say that he punished them, but no one believes it. Surely someone helped him. Romero put his hand on the table and added that the problem is that the Bloody Fangs are a group that even he can't do anything about, and now the guy is responsible for his own problems, since he couldn't do his duty. He stood up and said that from now on he will deal with everything that falls on his head himself. The son listened humbly. The father said that he will now burst into tears and ask for goodbye, but the young man answered well. He raised his head and said that he will deal with it himself. His father was shocked. The guy turned around and said that it was all his fault. He thinks he should take responsibility for it, said that he will return as soon as he completely sorts it out. The man sat back and said to stop. Roman left the office, took a handkerchief out of his pocket. He started wiping the blood from his forehead and closed his eyes. Suddenly a girl came up to him and asked if he had gone crazy. He looked at her and walked on. Then he asked what she was still doing here. The blonde stood nearby and was silent. Then Flora turned around and said that these Bloody Fangs were not afraid to terrorize even nobles. She followed the guy and added that if he somehow annoyed them, they would not let it go. What could he do without the help of his family? The young man did not pay attention to her and continued to leave. The girl added that everything would be fine if he just asked his father for forgiveness, after which he finally turned around and asked why he should do that. She asked again. The brunette turned around and asked if she really did not know her place. The girl was shocked and asked again. They, estate. Hands sprayed the guy with perfume. He didn't like the smell, but the man said that it couldn't be helped. He smelled like blood. Roman straightened his tie and said that this suit was also very tight. The servant said that since this was their first meeting with Liddy, they should show her respect. The guy looked at him and asked about the wedding. Then he looked down and thought that he had just started to get used to this world. Marriage now would only add to their troubles. The servant turned around and said that they would arrive soon, so they should wait downstairs. The young man thought that Hans was right. He had no reason to disrespect a girl who had not caused him any trouble. The brunette looked ahead and thought that he needed to somehow refuse this engagement, and at the same time not hurt her feelings. The blonde looked at the young man. He thought that this was what he was going to do, but it seemed that she was not going to show him any respect. The guy looked at the girl and thought that this gave him even less reason to show her respect. Roman turned around and said that she was quite an arrogant person. Then he raised his head and added that he understood what she was getting at. Most likely they had not even taken into account his circumstances when it came to breaking off the engagement. Flora was embarrassed. As soon as he said that he would take full responsibility, she became worried. He frowned and added that it became the moment the topic of breaking off the engagement arose. She had no right to interfere in his decisions. She believed that was all. The girl lowered her head, and Roman, leaving, added that since their paths diverged, they should not interfere in each other's personal affairs. He reasoned that the only reason he said he would take full responsibility was to prevent any talk of marriage that might arise as a consequence of the broken engagement, but it was also because he didn't want to have any relationship with her. The young man walked away down the hallway. Then he introduced the girl, and so, this is their first and last meeting. Night, an estate. The woman said that her husband drinks a lot. He took another glass. She asked if that was enough for today. Romero looked down and said that he raised his hand against Roman again. He looked at the drink. When they were commoners, often beat him, but from the moment they became nobles, he promised himself that this would not happen again. Rihanna hugged her husband and said that thanks to this promise, the other children grew up and became decent people. The man replied that he believed, but he put his hand to his forehead. Roman, the only child who survived that difficult time with him, does not know how to feel about him. The woman hugged her husband again and said that he shouldn't blame himself, even though he may not have been a good enough parent. They are the only ones who can influence their children's behavior. Then she looked at him and said that Romero, who knows, is not the one who would let his own son stray from the true path. He still has a chance to fix everything. They continued to sit in the room. The wife asked about the Bloody Fang. Their son is a proud child. He probably blurted it out in the heat of the moment. The man replied that if they leave everything as it is, who knows what will happen next time. Rihanna moved closer and asked why not just ask the captain to help him. The husband agreed, then called the servants. The guy entered the room and asked if they called him. Romero ordered to call Captain Jonathan. The hero and his servant walked through the streets of the city. They shouted at him from all sides. It was too dangerous to walk outside. Hans raised his head and said that they do not know when the Bloodfangs will attack. Maybe they should go back. But Roman turned and asked what he thought. When did the Bloodfang gain the power it has now? The man could not answer this question. Then the boy looked ahead and continued, the Bloodfang got its bad reputation when it ran away to kill its enemies. It gained it in war on those who committed a misdeed. Bad words create fear, and fear motivates to do what is said. The servant looked at him and asked if they were still not dangerous. The boy smiled and answered that they were, but only as long as they could make him afraid. The sun was shining. It was a nice day. They came to the 8-Lire Tavern. There were many people there. There was a lot of food on the table. The waitress said that this was all they ordered. Hans was very surprised. The boy got up from the table, said that the servant can stay here and eat, but he must go. The man was surprised and asked what he was talking about. The young gentleman looked at him and replied that from now on he would continue the investigation himself. Hans should stay here, as you are too dangerous. The man jumped up and shouted that he would not allow him. Then he came closer and said that even if he could be in danger, he could never send the gentleman alone. The boy looked at him and asked if he really was one of his men. The servant was surprised, asked again, then said that of course one of his men. Roman raised his hand and said that then he should stay here. He had done more than enough just accompanying him outside. He would be back soon. The man stood and looked at him. Then he took a step forward and thought that he did not believe that his master could say such a thing to him. He did not expect such a thing from him. After which Hans ran to the exit and thought that now was not the time to think. He needed to report this urgently. Roman walked down the street and thought that if he had learned anything about the Bloodfang over the past few days, it was that their strength was not that great, but since they worked in small groups, it was difficult to track them down. He walked among the houses. Perhaps they did not show themselves because they were afraid of the consequences if they failed to kill him. The boy lowered his head and thought that the leader sitting in the shadows, if he could not find them himself, he should just make them come to him. The young man continued walking in crowded places. He deliberately walked along the streets with the servant. They probably already knew where he was. Then he turned the corner. On top of everything, today was the day of regular night training. And because of this, the number of guards on the streets was greatly reduced. This meant that they were planning to take revenge on him. A man snuck up on Roman from behind. This was the perfect chance. He took out his knife. It turned out that it was a whole crowd. They turned to the young master. The bandit ran at the guy, shouting that this was the revenge of the Bloody Fang. But the young man continued to stand motionless. He only turned around a little. At that moment, someone called Jonathan. The captain turned around. Hans was running towards him. The man ran towards him and asked what happened. He was trying to catch his breath. The captain said that he should calm down and tell him what happened. The man lowered his head and said that the young master. He raised his head and said with fear that he must be found urgently. Roman was in danger. Meanwhile, a battle was going on in the alley. One of the bandits frowned and insulted the young man. He grabbed his hand and knocked the knife away, after which Roman caught it in midair. He plunged it straight into the brown-haired man. The guy pulled the knife out. Blood flowed. The young master stood and watched as the man backed away. The other bandits were in shock, did not understand what was happening. Their eyes widened, shouted what was happening, not at all what they heard. And the guy smiled and asked why they stood rooted to the spot. Let them come to him quickly. The Lord raised his hand and the bloody knife. The captain looked at the servant and asked if he really wanted to say that the young master went into the city without guards in order to fight the Bloody Fang. They exchanged glances with the other guards. The men laughed loudly and said that this could not be and added that Hans was joking. But the brunette raised his hand and said that it was true. Why lie like that? They did not have time. They needed to hurry. Jonathan thought about it. Then I remembered Romero, how he told him that the young master and the Bloody Fang had a big fight, asked for help since they asked for it. The captain scratched his head and thought why he went there at all if he did not even know how to properly hold a weapon. The other knights looked at him, received an order to prepare their weapons immediately. The man turned around and said that they needed to be taken to where the young master might be now. As long as they were nearby, the bandits would not dare to touch him. Then he frowned and thought that if everything the servant said was true, then the young man really was an idiot. The two bandits looked at their dead comrade. The guy turned and asked why they stood like valves. The members of the Bloody Fang looked at him in shock. The young man raised his hand and said to come to him. The brown-haired man began to get angry. He took out a knife and ran at the guy screaming. They decided to attack together and wished him death. The man struck, but the young man returned. Then he looked at him and thrust his knife. At that moment, another man ran up. Approaching, he swung and tried to strike. But here, too, the young master dodged. Roman jumped up and kicked him. The man flew straight to the ground. The guy came closer and asked if that was all, and he answered with fear that if he killed him, there would never be safety again. The young man squatted down and asked if he was serious, but he had already killed two, hadn't he? They only knew how to wag their tongues. The brunette raised the knife up and said that it was better to answer wisely to what he was asked or. He abruptly stuck the knife right into his leg. The man screamed. Roman looked at him and asked who their leader was. A gang member was walking down the street like a sack. He approached a bar. There were a lot of people there. They were sitting and talking at the tables. One of the visitors was telling a story, then turned around. He was shocked. The main character entered this bar. The bartender turned around, said hello, immediately recognized the young gentleman. He came closer and said hello in return. Everyone around was whispering if it was him. The young man sat down at the bar. Then he put his hand on the table. The bartender asked what the guy would like to order. He answered that he wanted to drink Tears of Dawn. The man raised his hand and apologized and said that they don't have that. Maybe he should recommend something else. Roman agreed and asked for something stronger. The bartender frowned, and the young man said with a smile that he had something to do in the morning, so he wanted a little drink. Everyone looked at him very cautiously, and the bartender suggested a dawn race. A cheerful sign above the door. A tall building. This pub stands in the middle of the street. That's where they get their orders. A gang member looked at the young man and said that they are given tasks if they say a special code. The guy asked what the code was. The man replied, a dawn tier, something stronger, for work in the morning. That's the order, you have to say it. Roman was sitting at the bar. The man addressed everyone present. He took a knife from under the table. Then he raised it straight above his head and said to attack, but it seemed it was too late. Everyone around was in shock. The man fell dead. Everyone started screaming and insulting the main character. People with knives started appearing behind him. But after a while, everyone ran out of the bar and shouted that they needed to call the guards. They turned around and were very scared. The main character dealt with them very quickly and skillfully. And here he was holding the man by the throat. Someone asked what happened. He instantly laid down 3. Was it really the young master? There were other rumors about him. The gang members were scared. The guy threw the enemy on the floor and thought that the greatest technique in Miram allows you to increase your strength through simple breathing. In an insignificant time, the heavenly demon was able to strengthen his body with the help of martial arts. Now the guy is not even close to his former self. Bloody Fang tried to attack again. They shouted that he was alone here, and there were more of them. The young man smiled. These people are nothing but trouble. At that moment, the man took hold of the counter. The bartender came to his senses and asked what had happened. It was just in time. The guy was approaching him and said that he was just about to finish. The men held on and asked what he was doing here, but the Lord replied that the bartender was not the first to decide to attack him, and it seemed that they were alone here. He was interested in something. The gang member looked at him and did not understand what was happening. Roman offered to chat. Jonathan asked in surprise what it was. There were unconscious people around. Someone was lying on the floor. The captain came up and wondered if the young lord had done it. One of the knights approached him and said that there was a survivor on the second floor, said that the young man was heading to Lawrence. The man looked up and asked why. In response, he heard that he said that the main base of the Bloodfang was with them. An hour before, in the bar, the guy turned to the innkeeper and said that it was in their mutual interest for him to talk. He rolled his eyes. He was clenching his hands. Several fingers were missing, and he already approached him and said with a smile that 2 fingers were already missing. But the man sent him and said that he would not say anything. He could kill him. He would be sure that the Bloody Fang would take revenge. Roman smiled and said that they should have done so right away. He even liked people like him a little. He raised his head and added that those who remain silent even after terrible torture and are not afraid of death, because such people usually have the most valuable information. The bartender sat bandaged and said that there was no point in wasting time. It was just better to kill him. The young man was surprised. He turned around. He approached the photo and said that it was time to make sure if the man was really not going to open his mouth until the last. Then he picked up a photo with his son. He showed it to the man and said that if he said that he would find his son and kill him. The innkeeper was shocked. He simply turned away and said that he did not know what the guy was talking about. This was not his son, but the young gentleman asked who the man was going to deceive. They looked the same. This made him very angry. The man started shouting that he was a fucking bastard, an aristocrat, threatening to kill his family. Roman came closer and said that he had recently accidentally learned something interesting about the Bloody Fang. For the sake of together, people from this group are ready to sacrifice their lives. From this he found out one curious detail. These guys are not so bad, just strong ones owed the Bloody Fang. The innkeeper listened to him attentively. The young man looked at the photo and said that this is why they became scoundrels. The Bloody Fang does not disdain crimes to drive people into debt, and turning the debtor's family into enemies is for them to sleep through. This is the truth about this group. They put people on the edge of their propo, threatening to kill their family. Does not this offer seem very reasonable? The photo showed a man with a satisfied son. At this point, he began to frown and replied that even if the young man knew the truth, nothing would change. The Bloody Fang always gets his way. Roman raised his head and said that he should think twice. He shouldn't be so sure, because he wasn't joking when he said he would kill his son. Then he threw the picture on the floor and swore on his own name. The young man came closer and said that he would tell the soldiers to find the boy and then kill him. He stepped right on the picture of the youth, very slowly and very painfully. But before doing so, he would give the man another chance. Tears appeared in the innkeeper's eyes. The young lord looked at him and said that he would remain silent for the sake of the Bloody Fang and let his son die a painful death, or share with him the information he needed so that he could deal with the Bloody Fang wetly. The choice was his. The sun was shining brightly. There was a basement in the house. The stairs went down quite deep. Screams could be heard from there. Was this really what happened? The young man stood in front of the chair and said that Roman single-handedly defeated an entire squad. If the knights of the family are in business, their affairs are bad. Ben gritted his teeth and said that he refused to believe it. The guy was not capable of such a thing. He looked directly at his subordinate and thought that they were going to declare themselves by destroying the Dmitri family, and the one who evaded service in the Royal Swordsman Academy dealt with the whole squad. The man raised his hand and asked where the young man was now. The brunette replied that he had just left the family lands. He thought he had knocked the information out of the morning dew. The leader asked again whether he was alone, and received an affirmative answer. Then he raised his hand and said that the guy was mocking them, daring to attack their bases alone. They needed to gather forces immediately. The people stood up and said that they understood everything, and the man added that they would kill Roman before the family knights got to them. They needed to deal with this bastard. He frowned, thinking that the boy dared to challenge the Bloody Fang. Today he would kill him mercilessly and hang his corpse in the city square. The Bloody Fang would avenge the shame. The sun was shining over the city streets. The Democrat put his hand on the documents and asked what happened to the Barco family. They answered that they had made a decision. There were many people sitting at the table. One of them said that there was a rumor that the family had taken a large loan from the gold bank. The only reason for this was to prepare for war, and another added that the outbreak of war was a matter of time. They must gather forces first. The Viscount folded his hands in thought. Then he raised his head and said that he believed that war was inevitable. He did not think that this could happen when he received the documents from the family. The brunette raised his hand and said that he would never have thought that the central government would take their side. At this rate, everything would end with the transfer of their lands to the Barco family. The old man raised his hand and added that they must hold on to the land at all costs. The Lawrence family lives only on fertile land. The men began to argue. According to the documents, their ancestors owed the family land. This cannot be true. Well, even the central government, they did something in secret from them. Everyone turned their attention to the Viscount. He asked to leave everything as it was. He lowered his head and added that no matter what happened, but they should not give up the land. If this happens, other families, like hyenas, will come running to grab a piece for themselves. Since the Barco family is not going to compromise, they must resist with all their might. The man lowered his eyes and said that this is why the engagement with the Dmitri family was concluded. Everyone around began to rejoice, as if this family exists. They are one of the richest in the northeastern region, although they were once commoners. The brunette said that no matter how much the Barco court took, the Dmitri family is still richer. The Viscount lowered his hand and said that he hoped so he sent his only daughter to this idiot of a family. Another young man intervened in the conversation and said that it was for the sake of the family, as the head he did the right thing and should not reproach himself. All this conversation was heard in the corridor. The girl leaned against the very door. Then she put her hand to her chest and thought what she should tell them. She began to walk from side to side and thought that she broke off the engagement, and now she does not know how to look her father in the eye. But why worry about what has already been done? This is her life. It cannot be sold to such an idiot. But this is her father's plan and the future of the family. Okay, she must tell him. The blonde collected her thoughts. She cannot marry someone she does not have feelings for. At that moment, a knight ran to the door. The girl turned around and looked at him. He ran closer, greeted her. Flora greeted him in return. The young lady continued to watch as the guy tried to deliver an urgent message, asking to open the door quickly. The guard above replied that he had already said, "First you need to hand over your weapons and do everything that is required." But the man shouted that the young gentleman was in danger. He raised his head and said that if something happens to Roman, he will not forgive it. Seriously. Another guard ran up and shouted that this was a big problem. Yes, Lawrence Square is now in riots. The captain was very surprised and said just not to tell him that this was the guy's doing. Now he will wash the door to hell. City Day. People watched in horror at what was happening. What was this? God, should I intervene? There was blood everywhere. The beaten man looked up and begged for mercy. The young man was dragging him by the collar across the square. The man thought it was easy. He was going down the stairs. Then thought the enemy was just a fool from the nobility. The bandit stood in front of the door. He thought that just one person was a piece of cake. The door opened. The man crossed his arms over his chest and thought that there were several of them. They were armed. Ben smiled and thought that they couldn't lose. It was just impossible. He opened his eyes wide in shock. In front of him were his dead people. His pupils narrowed. The hero took a step forward. Ben thought he was done for. He knelt down. The man looked ahead and thought he was definitely done for. Roman came closer. The leader of the gang thought he didn't want to die and asked for mercy. He looked up and begged for his life. The hero dragged him along the street. He stopped. The old man begged him. Roman dropped him. People gathered around. Ben was shaking and saying that if he spared his life he would do whatever he wanted. He would become his loyal dog and serve him for the rest of his life. Roman looked at him and said that he would become his dog. He should have said that before showing his fangs. He stepped on his head with his boot. People looked at them. Someone said that it was the leader of Bloodfang. The hero said that they probably knew what an asshole he was. Bloodfang had crossed Dimitri's family. The boy looked at him in shock when he said that they had dirty tricked people and tried to kill him so that he could not stop them. Roman looked down and said that these were the crimes of Bloodfang and therefore in front of them all he would tear out evil by the roots. The hero stepped on his head. Everyone screamed. Jonathan came galloping. He looked forward in shock. Blood spurted. Someone asked if this was true. The knight looked at the council and said that they allowed Roman to cross the border of the lands because he was Miss Flora's fiancé, but about an hour later he appeared in the square dragging a man behind him. Everyone looked at the guard in shock when he said that the hero announced that the man Ben Miles was the leader of the Bloodfang and then publicly executed him. Lawrence looked in surprise. Everyone around was discussing how true it was. The man looked at him and said that the important thing was that he killed a man without his master's permission. It cannot be left like that. The old man frowned and thought that this was not the main problem. The important thing was that the man who would become his son-in-law dealt with the Bloodfang. The Viscount said to call Roman here immediately. He wanted to hear everything from him personally. The knight and the boy walked forward. The doors opened. Roman entered the room. Lawrence looked at Captain Jonathan and thought that the hero was helped by the knights of the Dmitri family. Roman folded his hands behind his back and saluted the Baron. The guy looked at him and said forget the formalities and get down to business. He came all the way to the Lawrence lands to commit atrocity here. The guy looked at him and said it all started a couple of days ago. A bloody fang attacked an innocent citizen and he executed them on the spot. The doors were open. Flora was eavesdropping. She called out to the guard. He turned around. The blonde pointed to the door and asked the one who came with him was Roman, why was he here and why did he come to his father's office? She looked in shock when the guy said that she did not seem to know. The brunette looked ahead and said that he decided that this could not be left like this. He went to their main lair and killed the leader. He looked at the Baron and said that everything was like that. The Baron frowned and asked if he had the right to do that. He said that he had no right to execute someone in the Lawrence lands. The boy's expression darkened and he said that he knew that, but he doubted that they could handle Bloodfang on their own. He said that the identity of Bloodfang's leader was no secret, his crimes were known in their lands, and he had been released on bail many times, so he took care of him himself, decided not to trust this matter to their family. The brunette frowned and shouted, "How dare he?" Jonathan looked at him in shock. Roman closed his eyes and said that he was disappointed. He expected gratitude from them. He had blood on his hands, solving a problem that the Lawrence family had ignored. The Baron frowned when the hero asked if he had done anything wrong. Lawrence looked at his employee and asked if he knew about Ben. He replied that he knew that he was a criminal, but he did not know that he was their leader. The blonde looked ahead and said that they would close the topic here. If the Lawrence family had taken care of this earlier, none of this would have happened. The hero and his knight bowed when they were told that they would be rewarded later, and now they could go. The doors opened. They left. The Baron laughed. He grabbed his beard and said that he had gotten him. This was the same Roman. The brunette asked. They couldn't just forget about it. He answered that they could. He would become Flora's husband. It took courage to do such a thing. The Baron closed his eyes and said that he didn't want to hear anything. He didn't think that Roman would be a suitable match for his daughter. He asked to bring her here. He wanted to tell her about it. In the evening, the horses walked forward. Jonathan looked at the hero, asked if he really needed to be cheeky to the Baron. Maybe this time everything worked out, but if he had gotten angry. Roman said that Lawrence was not responsible for what happened. All he did was show that their carelessness was to blame for what happened. The redhead looked at him when he said that the Baron had not heard about the engagement being cancelled. He did not want to punish his daughter's fiancé. Jonathan thought that he had planned it all. He looked at the hero and thought what had happened. This man in front of him was not the Roman he knew. The brunette looked into the distance. Someone called the protagonist. Jung-hyuk looked up. He was told that he was the son of a heavenly demon. His father looked at him and said that if he really had enough skills to be his heir, he must prove it by getting out of the cold hard ground alive. The man looked down and said that he was one of his 12 children. His death was nothing to him. Even if everyone died, he would just make new ones. The boy looked at his father when he said that the only way to prove that he was worth something was to seize power over everyone. Children appeared behind the hero. They began to beat him. The brunette looked at him and said that he thought that the son of a heavenly demon could do something, but it turns out that he is just an arrogant little bastard. The hero stood up and prepared to attack. He was hit in the face. The children looked at him. He thought that in childhood, when other children were protected by their parents, the boy was beating him. The fist flew towards the hero. He was hit in the face. He remembered that he was simply thrown into a world where the strongest survive. In the evening in the Dmitri estate, candles were burning. Roman was taking a bath. He closed his eyes and thought that he was very exhausted. He quickly gets tired in this body. He thought that he had been through a lot since waking up in this world. The guy looked away. He raised his hand and thought that most of the events were related to the Bloody Fang. In order to destroy it, he swept away everything that stood in his way. The hero looked at his hand and thought that he did not regret anything. His personality had not changed. He cuts and tortures those who hinder him and gets rid of those who want to kill him by any means. This is the life he led until now. He thought that becoming Roman did not change anything. The brunette threw his head back and thought that always acting like this time could be dangerous. He still did not fully understand how this world works and his strength was much less than before. He was lying in the bathroom and thinking what to do now. Someone called him. The guy opened his eyes. Someone said that the Lord was calling him. He replied that he would be there soon. Romero pounded on the table. Jonathan approached him and said that Roman really did it. He noticed that the young master had changed a lot. The man looked at the Lord and said that the current master was not the person they knew before. Romero looked at his hand and said that his son had always been a headache for him. He was the only one of his children who did not stand out in any way. And he is the only child of his who remembers the time when he was a commoner. The child called for his father. He put a candy in his hand. Young Romero looked at his hand and asked what it was. Roman said it was a candy. His father looked at him and asked, "Leon ran all this way just to give it to him? He told him to stay away from here, it is dangerous." The boy smiled and said that he worked all day, so he wanted to give him a candy. He told him to eat it and then he will finish work faster and get home faster. The man looked at him in surprise. Romero raised his eyebrows and said that he wanted Roman to be happy. He clenched his fist and said that he treated him special because of this, allowed him a lot so that they would not be laughed at because of poverty, but he never thought that because of this he would take a wrong turn. The redhead looked at the Lord when he said that some part of him had already given up on his son. He clenched his fist and said that when he heard that Roman had destroyed the Blood Fang, hope returned to his heart. He looked forward when they said that his son had arrived. The Lord thought that no matter how he defeated the Bloody Fang, if he really did something of his own free will, he would do anything for him. Romero looked forward and told him to come in. The door opened. He thought that he would become the father he was missing. The brunette looked at him. He smiled. Romero said that he heard that he dealt with the Bloody Fang alone. The hero looked at him and thought that he saw that he had high hopes for what he would say. He looked away and thought that achieving beyond expectations could have bad consequences. If he kept silent about it now, he could buy some time for self-development. He frowned and thought about whether to tell him the truth or not. The second option was definitely more rational, however. The white-haired man was hit in the face. The boy smiled and asked if this was all he could do. The hero took a stone and hit the offender in the head. Blood started to flow. The brunette grabbed his face and screamed. Jung-hyuk swung. Blood spurted. He struck one blow after another. His stone was covered in blood. All the children looked at him in shock. The white-haired man threw the stone. He remembered that in his childhood, when other children were protected by their parents, he was simply thrown into a world where the strongest survives. The boy turned and said that they said that he was the main one, so let the rest of the cave know that the one who broke their main one's head. The hero remembered that he had seized power over that place. The boy's pupils narrowed and he said that it was him. Roman smiled and said that it was him. He thought that he was a heavenly demon and he couldn't hide his superiority. After some time, wooden swords hit each other. The boys were training. Someone shouted to stop training. He took a step forward. The Baron walked forward. The boys bowed and greeted them. The blonde man stood with his eyes closed. He looked up and wondered what Roman had lost. The hero wasn't looking at him. The captain stopped. He turned around. The redhead looked at the students and asked for their attention, saying that a sword fight was about to be held for Mr. Roman. Everyone looked at him as he told those who wanted to step forward. The guy looked at the hero and wondered why they would suddenly fight this fool. The brunette wasn't looking at him. An hour earlier, the hero said he did it. He was looking forward. Romero looked at him and asked how he had even dealt with the whole Bloody Fang. The guy closed his eyes and thought that he should answer him in a way that wouldn't make him doubt his words. He replied that in fact he had been practicing all this time, improving his sword skills. The father looked at him and asked why he hid his training from him. If he only knew, he would have thrown all his strength into helping him. He replied that it was a long and difficult period for him, when he did not live, but existed and behaved like a child. The hero said that the one who was called Dmitri the Fool, he wanted to show that he could handle everything on his own. The father said that even if so, is it possible to first hone his skills alone, and then take and defeat the Bloody Fang? The hero looked at him and said that the Bloody Fang is an organization that issues loans, maintaining its authority by intimidating and recruiting those debtors who can be useful. He decided that he could deal with it only if he pulled out the weed by the roots, and so he deceived their leader and attacked. The man looked at him in shock and asked if he had lured the leader of the Blood Fang. They would definitely want to take revenge on the noble. The hero said that was why he became bait. The Lord raised his hand and shouted that it was a very dangerous plan. If they decided to take revenge, they could simply abandon their leader and even kill him. The brunette looked at him and said that the people who created this organization through intimidation and coercion had no reason to risk their own lives for the leader when they could finally gain freedom. There was silence. Romero frowned and thought that it took a lot of courage to pull off such a thing. There were no words to express his pride. He wondered if his son was capable of this. The Lord asked his son to fulfill one of his requests. The hero looked at his father when he said that he wanted to see his swordsmanship. Romero thought that he wanted to see it with his own eyes to the point of madness. Everyone was silent when Jonathan asked if there were any volunteers to participate in the duel. The blonde guy frowned and thought that of course there were none. If you win, you will only earn yourself a headache, and if I lose, you will be humiliated forever. Who would want to participate in this theater of the absurd, where a fool will show his talents to his father? Jonathan looked ahead and thought that they needed someone who could resist the master to maintain the prestige of the knights and at the same time test Roman's strength. He said that since there were no volunteers, he would choose himself. The red-haired guy looked ahead and thought that he would like to fight him himself, but the captain would most likely choose anyone to swing his sword a couple of times. There is only one here who can handle it. Chris looked to the side when he was called. His eyes widened in shock when he was told to step forward. He remembered the first time he met Roman last year when he was on patrol and received a report of some drunkard behaving violently and immediately rushed there. The knight ran in and said that the guard was there. Someone was shouting that these idiots were making fun of him. There was liquid spilled on the floor. The stranger was shouting how dare he say something to him. There were broken bottles on the floor. The guy was shouting how he really wanted to close his shop. A married couple looked at him and asked for forgiveness. The brunette shouted at them to shut up. Roman looked at them and told them not to dare open their mouths. He raised one eyebrow and told them to come to him. He threw a bottle at the people when they asked him to calm down. Chris came up to him and said that he had enough. The man asked who he was and that he should get out of here. The knight took him by the hand and said that even if he was the master, but if he continued to behave like this, he was hit on the cheek. Roman screamed how dare he touch him. The blonde looked at him. He said, look at how he looks at him. The knight remembered that as soon as he slapped him on the cheek, he immediately understood everything. This man had never trained his body in his entire life. The hero pushed him. Chris thought that his physical training was several times less than that of any adult man. He thought how pathetic he was. Roman screamed something. The knight thought that he was bragging completely out of hand, that he was the son of a baron, but in fact he was just a loser. The guy wanted eyes and remembered that he sincerely thought that he would rather die than become such scum, and they wanted him to fight him. Chris looked in shock when he was told to step forward. He looked at the captain and said that he did not think this task was for him. He replied that the master single-handedly dealt with the Bloody Fang to equalize the forces. He would go. The boy raised his hand and tried to say something, but he was interrupted. He looked away and said that he understood everything. The boys stood opposite each other. Chris looked at the hero. He looked at him. The captain looked forward and began to speak, but he was interrupted. The knight said that he had one suggestion. He looked at the captain and said that in addition to the usual sword swings, he trained so that he could fight in real duels and battles, whoever his opponent was. He did not want to be careful with him. The blonde looked forward and asked to let him perform without restrictions. He would take it as an honor to fight with the master. He thought that this fool could not deal with the Bloody Fang. Taking this opportunity, he would show him. Romero nodded approvingly. He looked at his son. He laughed. Chris frowned and wondered if he was laughing. He pursed his lips. The captain said that it seemed that the master agreed. He looked to the side and told the opponents to get ready. The boys stood in their places. They looked at each other. Chris's pupils narrowed. The hero looked at him. The captain ordered to begin. They started. The knight ran at the hero. He narrowed his eyes and blocked the blow. The observers looked at them and said how fast Chris was. Jonathan looked at them in shock. The blonde looked at the brunette and wondered if he had blocked. He frowned and jumped back. Chris gripped the sword and thought he felt the power when he crossed swords with him. Roman stood when he thought he had a stable attack posture. Was it possible that this was just an accident? He frowned and thought, so what if he didn't expect this? He rushed into the attack and thought that he should grind this guy into dust now to calm down. Roman dodged. Chris looked at him. He struck again. The hero looked at his sword. They separated their swords. The guy frowned. He struck, but he dodged. Roman looked at him. The blonde's eyes widened. He took a step forward. The brunette struck him. The knight looked at him in shock. He jumped back. The guy stopped. He looked ahead and thought that now it was dangerous. Romero and Jonathan opened their mouths in shock. The Baron asked if it was possible. The observers looked at them and said that he almost. Chris frowned and thought, is the master really capable of such a thing? He looked at him. The knight clenched his teeth and thought that there were no flaws in his defense, dodging and counterattack. Was he really the one who punished the Bloody Fangs? He looked ahead and thought, what was he even talking about? Is Dmitri the fool, and he is worried that he will lose in front of everyone. Roman said that this is enough for a warm-up. The knight asked again. The hero flew up to him and said that this time he will be the first. The blonde frowned. He raised his sword. The guy blocked the blow and thought, why this idiot is so fast. The brunette retreated. He looked at him. A blow happened. Roman delivered one blow after another. Everyone looked in shock and wondered what kind of furious attack this was. The blonde frowned and thought how hard it was for him to defend himself. He opened his eye and thought that this was dangerous. There must be some way to attack. Roman swung his sword. The knight began to fall. His pupils narrowed. The brunette swung his sword. Chris thought that this was a good move. He saw an opening and thought that he had a lot of disadvantages. The blonde swung. He looked to the side. The hero dodged. He smiled. The blonde wondered if he really wanted him to attack. He realized that he would lose. Roman smiled. Chris sent mana into the sword. Jonathan frowned and shouted at him to stop. A divine aura appeared around him. The hero looked at him in shock. An explosion occurred. The onlookers closed their eyes and asked what the hell was going on. Romero frowned and called out to his son. He exhaled. He looked up. He dodged the attack. Chris looked at him in shock. He fell. Everyone looked at them in shock. Roman pulled out his sword and looked at his opponent. Someone asked who this new deputy captain was. There was a blow. The stranger said that he must be joking. He is the captain's best student and at his age. Jonathan and Chris fought. One of the knights looked at the other and said that he is a 2-star knight of aura. He asked why he is so young and already 2 stars. The other answered that they say that after 6 months of training, mana was felt in him. The guy attacked the captain. The green-haired man raised his hand and said that he rose to the 1-star rank in more than 3 years. The other asked if it was really that fast. The red-haired man dodged. Someone said that they heard that his swordsmanship is simply incredible. The girl smiled and asked his name. The guy knelt down. The captain looked at him. He clenched his fist and said that that's enough for today. Chris closed his eyes. He stood up and said no. The guy wiped the sweat off his face and asked to fight again. Jonathan smiled and thought that despite his talent, he continued to work so hard on par with the others. He was definitely a genius. Chris fell. The sword fell from his hands. Everyone looked at them in shock. Roman pulled out his sword and looked at the enemy in the castle. The knight was lying down and called the captain. The baron looked at him and asked what the hell. The guy was a 2-star knight, which they always showed off. Jonathan frowned and thought what was going on here. Just a month ago he was a slob who did God knows what. To achieve such skill, it takes years of diligent training. He fights as if he spent his whole life training. Romero looked at the red-haired man when he told him not to be surprised and to listen. Anyway, Mr. is a real genius. Roman stood next to the enemy. He looked down. The knight was lying down. The hero thought that he was able to press the enemy and see his next move, such as he could easily cut all the bloody fangs alone. He thought that the guy deserved to make Jonathan proud. He had good data by the standards of this world, but if you compare them to his, then they are terrible. The brunette looked down and thought that even their lowest ranked warriors would be stronger than him. He looked ahead and thought that at the end he surprised him. What kind of power was that? The baron laughed. Everyone looked at him. The hero turned around. The man smiled and said that this was his son. His eldest son was a real master of the sword. He turned to the captain and asked if he was sure. He nodded and said that he had no other explanation for this. He was a fool if he could not notice it sooner. Romero frowned and said that it was incredible. Roman looked at him. He told him to quickly go to him. He spread his arms and said that he had not been in such a good mood for a long time. He praised him for being able to achieve something himself. The brunette crossed his arms and said that reward and punishment should always be deserved. He can ask him for whatever he wants. He smiled. The guy looked at him and said that his father told him that in 6 months he should go to the battlefield since he dissolved the marriage with the lady. He asked if he wanted him to settle the issue with his call. Roman looked at him and said no, he wanted to choose the people who would go with him himself. Romero looked at him with incomprehension. He raised his hand and asked if they really didn't have more time because they could settle the matter with the marriage. The hero looked at him and said that he would go. The father looked at him in shock. He closed his eyes and said okay. He looked at his son and said that he could regulate everything concerning his service himself. Roman said that there was something else he wanted to ask him. He replied that since he had shown his true face, how could he not listen to him? The guy looked away. He was looking at the knight. He frowned and shouted, were they really asking him to teach the master aura? Jonathan crossed his arms and said that this was the Baron's order. He replied that this was too much. The knight told him to look at him, at his face. After he used the aura against the master, everything went so far that he was simply knocked out, and he woke up only now. He grabbed his head and said that just from this he already wanted to die, and to teach this even if his head was cut off for refusing. Jonathan looked at him and told him to listen to him. The knight looked at him. He said that while he was teaching him, he would learn more about his incredible transformation, and if he copes with it, he will agree to let him receive secret skills. Chris looked at him in shock.